Hello, Endersword here again. We've got another replay from the Bronze League this time, sent in to us by Phobos, the Zerg player in the top left-hand corner. His opponent for today will be the Protoss Vengeance, who will be our bad guy player during this game. The overall theme to this is going to be how to hold off a gateway push by the Protoss player, but the keys to it will not be tactically how to hold it off, but instead things that you can do ahead of time to make sure that you see it coming and are prepared for it before it ever happens, as opposed to responding militarily at the time. So the key points that we're going to be looking at are, number one, scouting. You'll notice that this is a function in almost every game that people just aren't getting enough information about what's going on during that game, and therefore simply can't respond accordingly to what's happening because they don't know what's happening. Point two is, again, going to be larva management. This is always going to be the case with a Zerg player, that you have to avoid leaving a larva on the ground. You have to make the correct decisions on whether those become drones or those become military units, and be hitting those injects so that you have the maximum amount possible. The third thing that we're going to be looking at is just general awareness and general defense at all times. Always making sure that you're aware of what's going on and that you can respond to that situation if need be. Zerg is a very reactive race, but a lot of that reaction relies on you finding out what you need to know as soon as you can, and then responding immediately accordingly to what you've just found out. So we'll see kind of a breakdown in that and how it leads to a pretty bad situation for the Zerg player. To the game itself here, the spawning pool goes down. Watch the location of this. It's slightly okay, but you don't want to end up blocking your own geyser with your own buildings. We'll check back in that a tiny bit later when the geyser is up and the assimilator is up, and kind of see the impact of having it there. Do go for the quicker hatch. We've got Overlord scouting out to this position, and an Overlord's kind of spotting for that hatchery. I guess to make sure that no pylons are going down there or anything. There still could be some hidden in this area. You don't want to get that cannon rushed. So yeah, often people do use an Overlord to kind of look over that situation, make sure there's no funny business going on or anything like that. We had earlier scouting come in and just determine that there's one gateway here and one pylon there. Didn't see any gas go down at this point, and then the scouting was ended at that point. We will see throughout the rest of the game that no additional information is actually achieved out of this base. You would ideally want an Overlord to be sent down to this area so that it could do a little drive-through through the base to see what's going on, that it could turn into an oversee and drop a changeling. You could take one of these Zerglings and be poking up the ramp to see what's going on. Throughout the game, Phobos doesn't know if there's an expansion. He doesn't know what unit composition is here. Doesn't know what additional buildings are being added. For all he knows at this point, it's a zealot rush or something. You just don't have any information on what is going on. Do get a roach warren here. Hatchery is injected, but it was done a little slow. This comes down, injects that one, but we don't have a link between the two bases, and that's going to be costly in the game as well. You want to link up your expansions as much as possible. You also want to make sure you don't have this. When you do make a hatchery, I've said this a few times, as you're making it, set its rally point to where you want it to be, and that way you're not going to forget about it later. Larva management-wise, we've got larvae sitting on the ground, 3 there, 3 there. When there are 3 on the ground in particular, it means the hatchery is not naturally making any more for you. The only ones that will come out are ones from injects at that point. You can't be in that situation because you're just missing that production permanently. Whereas if there's 1 or 2 on the ground, at least the hatchery itself is making you a 3rd one. Once you hit 3, it's not making them for you anymore. So you need to be spending at that. You really need to be keeping them down to next to nothing, but you certainly have to be spending them once they're above 3, because you're just wasting all this production, and over the course of a game it really, really adds up. Just can't be having this on the ground. We get creep spread out in this area. He does have the 3 queens. And what's going on here? So if we just look at that, so that's Zerg's kind of first warning on what's going to happen, that there is a force coming out. Again, he doesn't know what the size of this force is, what production is behind it. He can see, okay, we've got 9 units here, and they're coming up, and they're definitely pretty much going to kill him. He's got no military whatsoever at this point. He's got a probe there, so he's likely going to put down a proxy pylon or another proxy pylon if there's one out on the map, and he has to then respond accordingly. He's responding by making 5 roaches, but there is more larvae on the ground to be used. So you don't want to be doing that. There was larvae on the ground, and there was additional minerals on the ground. He simply was capped in gas itself. When you're in that desperate mode, make sure that you make all your everything. If you make 5 roaches and you run out of gas, switch immediately to Zerglings. Get something out in order to defend yourself. If you end up with 860 minerals that you can't spend, your hatchery should be making 2 more queens. Do something. Up in your base here, ideally, again, you want creep spread connecting these 2. Start making a couple spine crawlers. Just you're in all-in defense mode at that point, so you can't afford to not be making things at absolute max level. But we are going to rewind a tiny bit to when we first see what is happening and find the reaction to that. So again, we've got a bunch of larvae on the ground. We've got a bunch of larvae on the ground. And unbeknownst, the Protoss player starts moving out. At this point, if a Zergling was in this area, scouting out, he would immediately see that this move out was occurring, and he would see what was in that force. So it would give you a certain amount of time, probably about 5-10 seconds more, before it actually gets into the range of this watchtower. So we'll see at about 7 minutes, he could have been able to tell that that force was coming out and react accordingly. At 7 minutes, if he had that bit of early warning to see that this was coming, then we would have had 9 larvae, 6 more larvae. We would have had 15 larvae that could have instantly been turned into military units. He did have enough money to turn almost all of those, I guess 13 of them, into Zerglings immediately. 13 Zerglings is really, 26 Zerglings. So that would actually have been enough at this point to hold that force. 26 Zerglings probably could have swarmed that down, particularly once you add in the queens and any additional production you can make in the meantime. So at 7 minutes, he should have been aware that this was going to move out. Let's see when he actually does get a kind of a second warning. Look at the edge of vision here, right there. So about 10 seconds later, we're now aware that this force is coming out. He had just started these 6 drones, so that's a bit unfortunate. He did start those 6 just before he would have been able to see this Protoss force coming out. But we'll also see how it progresses a bit from there. 7, 12, 15 drones. All of a sudden now, despite the fact that those were completely in his view on the mini-map, opts to make additional drones, 9 more on top of that 6 that were in production when it first came into view, and that ends up using up all the larvae that was available. And it's a direct result of, 1, not having proper scouting over here to see when that was going to occur, but also when he did have this kind of backup to see this coming out, didn't respond accordingly to it. So he may have just not been able to see on the mini-map. He may have, not that he's not able to, but he didn't see on the mini-map that this force was coming, didn't respond quickly enough to actually take a look down. If we look at Phobos' actual camera during that, we can see he's focused up here, focused down there, back to these bases, injecting, doing your injects, good. And right about now should be seeing that, but doesn't see it, goes to his hatcheries, and doesn't realize till too late that it's actually there, and he's already issued the commands to build those forces, or to build those drones, not forces. Forces would have been fine. So at this point, it's now a little too late. It was just a matter of reacting slow to that. Once you're in this position, you've got one queen stuck up front, one in the back, one up here, not connected by creep. 3 queens should be able to transfuse each other a bit, and that kind of gives you a lot of help in holding this off or delaying it. You don't want to be rallying your overlords to the front middle, and we'll also see rally mistakes here. Roaches being rallied right into things so that they don't really mass in any number before they get beaten down. We've got the top rallying directly through the forces so that those additional roaches just get eat up before they ever get to the point. They will walk to the point you told them to go before they stop and start attacking, so you can't be running them through forces. When you do see a force start to breach your front door, reset those rally points to locations that will allow you to mass up the forces before actually engaging, or else you're just throwing them away single file. If you can, don't just sit there while the zealots go to town on what you've got there, and do things to distract the force as well. A lot of people will just start putting down spine crawlers with no real hope that they're going to go up, but just to make the force decide, well, I can't attack the hatchery. I have to leave the mineral line alone for a second. I have to leave the army alone for a second so that I can get rid of the threat that may be going up. You can start making them back home. Again, you do want that creep there so that you can actually move them more efficiently. And the idea is to then be rallying some force up here that can actually oppose this at all. He ends up getting caught, as he says in this game, with no army, and that is ultimately what lands the final blow. But we see throughout this entire game, he could have been aware that there were 4 gates here by sending an overlord down a lot earlier to take a look. He could have been aware of what was at top of the ramp by putting a Zergling in this area so that he would be able to tell what was going on and when people were moving out. He could have seen from holding this watchtower the exact point at which that army showed itself, and he could have responded accordingly at home to make sure that there was a military there, and he should have been producing a military throughout the entire game in order to defend himself, or even had a couple of preemptive spine crawlers in front to try and hold that type of push. So this game really does come down a lot to a lack of awareness of what was going on, and then a lack of proper response once he was aware of the situation. This wasn't a particularly scary or large push. It wasn't barely even a 4-gate. There should have been a lot more units if this was really a committed 4-gate, but the Protoss player was slacking a bit on his side as well. One thing that I will just point out, because I guess I mentioned it earlier and never went back to it, is this building location. Try not to do that. You can see, I think right now he might be almost perfectly okay. It's just hitting it and turning around. But if you compare that to one of the straight lines, you can see that these probes are waiting there longer. So this travel time is mildly delayed, just because he's going around that building. I think he's okay here, but if he had been just a quarter inch over this way, you do end up blocking yourself. So just be really careful with that. And on some maps, it will actually cause a delay, and on some it won't. So there are times when the Vespian geyser is a tiny bit further away from your hatchery than other maps. So, as particular in the ones where you get two side by side, one of them is slightly farther away than the other one. So be careful of doing this. But overall here, general point: lack of awareness, lack of scouting, lack of proper defense, and lack of response time. Don't leave your larva on the ground, and make sure that you're defending yourself at all times. Thanks for watching.